Moines School Board to order for Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. Ms. Jenkins, could you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson, Mr. Bodie, Ms. Delagardelle,
Here.
Ms. Martirano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. If anyone wishes to speak during this forum, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschool.org. Speakers will be called individually. We ask they please state their name and address prior to providing comments. If you are a student speaker, you do not have to provide your address. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to program services and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. Please avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. Thank you for your support of our school district. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, this public forum is not a time for board engagement and discussion, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters regarding attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at a time after the meeting. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do have one, Brandon Oliver.
Hi, I'm Brandon Oliver. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. Social and emotional growth cannot happen without mutual trust, and I trust that you know how much I love to grow with this district. That's why I'm speaking tonight. As a school district that claims to be both anti-racist and becoming the model of urban education, it is important not to model white supremacy by only having conversations with BIPOC or giving them defensive equity roles, but I find it loving to trust Black, Brown, and Indigenous adults, as well as adults of color, with opportunities of evaluating and holding the district accountable. And for those of us who don't pass the evaluation, we may need to make room for people who can. In Des Moines Public Schools, there is very little evidence of people of color at any age being given opportunities to evaluate and hold accountable adults of non-color. This is especially true in higher up positions. Meanwhile, there is overwhelming evidence of the opposite. We must also remember that tokenism often leads to monolithic representation, so there needs to be room for nuance. At this time, I'd like you to imagine the Central Campus auditorium in which you've been meeting. Try to picture in your mind the 1,409 different audience seats. Imagine sitting in each chair is a Black male, each person being a uniquely nuanced individual. I've looked at the numbers. 2 of those auditoriums completely filled would still not add up to the 3,268 Black males currently enrolled in Des Moines Public Schools. For the next 10 seconds, I'd like you to see each student in the audience. Feel free to close your eyes if that helps to picture them. I believe I have 1 more minute to speak. During the last board meeting, I heard the question, how will we know when we're successful? What would you do if you saw each student in those seats holding their own sign which has the words, "Ask me if you trust me"? As a school board, you can allow the opportunity for students of color and members of the community to evaluate and hold you accountable on achieving your SMART goals. The question is, will you? Or at the very least, will you give that opportunity to each of the 3,268 students you pictured earlier who are directly mentioned in your SMART goals? How will you know when you're successful? Show love by asking the people marginalized by our district and trust them for a stronger social and emotional connection. Thank you.
Ms. Jenkins, do we have any more speakers?
We do not.
Okay. Mr. Oliver, I'd like to thank you for your input, and I appreciate you speaking to the board. I will now close the public forum, and the regular school board meeting will reconvene at 6 p.m. time is now 6 p.m. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cody,
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Here.
Ms. Martirano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Move approval, Caldwell Johnson.
Second, Martirano.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Martirano. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our meeting on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval, Caldwell Johnson.
Second, Delagardelle.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Delagardelle. Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle, Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on the agenda is consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do not.
Okay. Ms. Martirano, I believe you have the consent motion.
I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $4,140,038.37, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $239,112.55.
Is there a second?
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Are there any discussion or questions?
I have a question regarding item 11, the IM materials for professional development. I'm sorry I didn't send this to you earlier, Tom, so if it's something that you need to get back to me on, it's fine. I'm just curious, are we building an internal capacity for professional development, a train-the-trainer model, so that future costs will not have to be outside of the district?
Yes. It's not, I wouldn't call it a strict train the trainer, but yes, we are building capacity. This is something that, since it is new and we lost some opportunity, we lost some time that we would have otherwise had because of COVID. So we're a little bit behind where we normally would have been. But yes, this will not be an ongoing expense.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0. The next item, now it's time for our public hearing. The next item on our agenda is D1, public hearing for Roosevelt Nurtorium ADA upgrade. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Wells Plus Architect for ADA upgrades to the natatorium at Roosevelt High School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
Where's the pivot?
May I have a motion and a second to approve item D1?
So moved, Martirano.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Mr. Barron. Is there any discussion or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Brett,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is D2, public hearing for Capitol View Elementary School student drop-off lane. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Bishop Engineering for a student drop-off lane at Capitol View Elementary School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item D2?
So moved, Martirano.
Delagardelle, second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Delagardelle. Is there any discussion or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
oh, sorry, Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
and Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is D3, public hearing for Central Academy exit ramp structural repair. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Raker Roads Engineering for the structural repair of the vehicular exit ramp at the southwest corner of Central Academy, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item D3?
Sawyer, so moved.
Caldwell Johnson, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Is there any discussion or any questions? Hearing none, Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. Next on the agenda is item E1, discontinuation, of SRO program. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do. Ms. Ann Cross,
Good evening, Dr. Ahart and school board members. Ann Cross, 1908 40th Place, Des Moines 50310. I'm speaking to you tonight on behalf of the Des Moines Education Association. As a DMPS teacher and DMEA leader, I'm speaking in support of the work our students, especially Endy and Lyric, in their work to remove SROs from our school buildings. I would encourage the board to vote in support of the students and the district recommendation. Passing this proposal is only the first step in becoming an anti-racist district. The MEA wants to challenge the district leaders and board members to work with our students and union to immediately begin working on the transition plan for our schools. Thank you.
Ms. Jenkins, do we have any other speakers?
we do not.
Ms. Cross, we would like to thank you for addressing the board. I would like to speak to this item E1, discontinuation of the SRO program. I have a prepared statement that I would like to read. The proposal that has been presented to the school board about a change in the school resource officers and our agreement with the Des Moines Police Department reflects months of discussion and work by many in the district as well as the community at large. It is reflective of input from our students, staff, and families. It is responsive to the town halls we held last summer in the midst of a national debate on race and justice, and it is consistent with our work at being an anti-racist organization. As chair of the school board, I want to take a few minutes to discuss our process for the proposal to move forward. As the governing board of Des Moines Public Schools, we elect members of are committed to following the student outcomes focused governance framework. This allows us to direct the superintendent's work through the policies we adopt, specifically our student expectation goals, which we set the direction for the district, and our management limitation policies, which set the boundaries within which we allow the superintendent to operate. As anyone who follows the work of this board knows, continuous oversight happens in the form of progress monitoring of these policies throughout the year. Back in January 2019, our management limitation policy 2.1 on the treatment of students was amended to include a statement that the superintendent shall not cause conditions or allow environments that contribute to the school to prison pipeline, including the employee of SROs without a professional development structure reflective of the district's plan. The DMPS SRR replacement plan developed by Dr. Ahart and his team provides the board with his interpretation of this policy segment and his plan for compliance with it. The board does not need to continue to go further with the plan itself, having already set its expectations via our policy. We are the board to take action. By voting for the plan, we would be communicating that we own the document and therefore are removing accountability from the superintendent for its results and potentially hamper staff's agility to respond to and adjust accordingly for any potential shortcomings in the plan as is rolled out as those who would continue to need board approval going forward. Instead, our support of this plan is implied. The board entrusts the superintendent to move forward, and we as a board will continue to verify by monitoring the progress toward our student outcomes goals while staying within the boundaries set through our policies. We as a board will continue to do the work on student outcomes focused governance framework, and you will see these changes as we move forward to strengthen the work that we are committed to do. We will be having further conversations with the community this spring about this work. As the board, we will continue to commit to learning outcomes of over 31,000 students that we serve. And if there's anything that we would need to do further with this plan, we as a board could do that at a future time. But I wanted to read that. I would allow time now for my board colleagues to make any comments.
Ms. Bradley.
Yes, Ms. Della Gardell.
I just wanted to raise up that while I fully agree and support with we should follow our policies, we did outline with our community that would be voting on this. So are there aspects of this that we anticipate the board will need to take votes on? I know one thing that you and I discussed earlier was any potential expenditures, including, hiring of new staff, or is there any sort of dissolution of the current MOU that we have, or any sort of resolution that we need to make that we're not renewing that?
Yes, that is information that I did ask those questions about that, Ms. Della Gardell, I know in the conversation that we had today. And so if there's anything that we need to do further, we will. And agenda planning, we will talk about this as well. So if there's anything that needs to move forward with this, or I know that there are some that are voicing, about a vote, but I do still believe wholeheartedly that this aligns with the policy and the superintendent. Now we trust him to do the work, and so he has the support of the board to do that. But I will be checking on that, Ms. Della Gardell, to make sure, and we'll make any decisions further if I find out what I do from Miriam, but I did reach out to her today.
Okay. The other thing that I was going to ask was, I know in the past the board has adopted a number of resolutions from supporting Black Lives Matter to, supporting our community being able to take stronger stances on keeping firearms out of the hands of youth across our community. And so I just had wondered if there might be opportunity for a board member perhaps myself or in combination with two other board members, to create a resolution of the support of the dissolution of our SRO program, to give board members the opportunity to vote. And I also think there are folks in the community that would like to see where we support on this, because I think they feel it's important to hold us accountable. And since we had kind of outlined that to the community that we would be voting, would that be something that perhaps a committee of us could work on?
That is something that I could take into consideration, Ms. Della Gardell. With, I would like to give some thought to that, but yes, I think we could look into that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just know our change and our stance around how we were going to operate with this on policy happened fairly late in the day today, without a lot of chance for the board to kind of wrap our brains around how that might work. So I appreciate your consideration, Ms. Bradley.
No, thank you, and thank you for voicing your concerns as well. Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just going to offer as well in response to Ms. De La Gardell's question. We will ultimately be approving the fiscal year budget for 22, and many of the recommendations would be embedded within the context of the budget approval. So when it comes to the fiscal implications of this change, that's a matter, of course, relative to approval of the budget. And of course, we'll be having a budget work session this evening. So I believe that that piece of your question would certainly be addressed when we approve the budget.
Yeah, couple things. I will, I like your idea, Kirsten, about a resolution. I think we just have to make sure that figure out what we are required to do, and then we'll know what we are or are not required to do. If we're not required to have an up or down vote on this, then I would work with you on drafting a resolution in support of it. I am completely in support of this work and think it is the right thing to do. And I also think that there's value in the board being clear about that. You know, I think that it's, I think it can be debatable, you know, the policy connection. And I can make a claim for the connection to policy that would bring this to us. But I also think Dawana's got a fair case about it not it being operational and not necessarily being our responsibility to approve it or not. But I do think that in situations like this, where there's some sharp opinions one way or another, it's important for the district, I think, and for the superintendent as well, for the board to be clear about its position. I think that's really a big part of our responsibility as a board, and I don't think that we should avoid taking a position on this at all.
So I have a question. I guess at this point, I'm now very confused about the timeline. So I heard a lot of things saying we're going to wait until we hear more, but also the town runs. I'm lost.
So there is already support for this, and Dr. Ahart, I believe the team has already started implementing some of the plans that you've proposed in place already. So this is already moving and has the support of the board. Ms. Della Gardell did bring up some things to me today that I did reach out to Miriam to ask some questions about, to see if there was some legalities that need to be had to where a vote might be needed. I think another thing that has been offered is that we possibly could look into a resolution if that's something that is the will of the board, and we can look into that. I think what we're saying right now is that Dr. Ahart has the support of the board to be moving forward with his plan. I think where we probably will differ on is the voting of this. And so the timeline is Dr. Ahart and his team have already started to move forward with this plan, and they can continue to do so because they have the support of the board. My stance on this is that it's very operational, and then it's tied to policy. And so that's where my comments came from today, but I will take into the comments of the consideration of my board colleagues as well. Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, I seen your hand up. Is that just still from the previous time? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right. Ms. Martirano?
Madam Chair, I just want to thank you for observing our policy governance framework, which helps define and focus our role as board members. We all know student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. And I look forward to continued monitoring of the treatment of students moving forward, and know that we as a board are still navigating these waters of our our policy governance framework, and appreciate your leadership, and know that we are in support of the superintendent's plan, and again, look forward to monitoring it closely as the rollout continues.
Thank you, Ms. Martorano. Ms.
And-
Sawyer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And so obviously there are a few of us on this call with Kim and Dwana and myself that are undergoing coaching in student outcomes focused governance and this new framework. So it's just a transition that we are making as a board, but this is a decision that it's not, I mean, I will tell you, this is one that I think, I won't speak for my board colleagues, but certainly for myself, that looking forward to seeing what this plan will be and transitioning into this plan, supportive of this plan, and entrusting our superintendent to move this work forward. We will be monitoring, as Kim had mentioned. I believe there was even information in the plan of kind of that monitoring schedule, but even through our treatment of student report, so I mean, just things like that, that we should be looking at that on a regular basis and hopefully getting more concrete data as well. But and definitely the budget outlook and looking at how we are filling positions with regards to the funds that we are currently expending on the SRO program. But the work has begun, and so it's just a matter of moving the work forward, and excited to see how the progress continues. So thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank you all for providing your input as well, and we'll continue to have conversations as needed on that. We will now be going to our information only. These items are just for information only, and the only thing that we have on that this evening is the proposed downtown fiscal year 22 calendar, so please make sure you look at that. We will now move to items of privilege. Next on the agenda is items of privilege. Do I have any board members that have anything to share?
Madam Chair, I wanted to go back very briefly to our
Yes.
information only items on the proposed downtown 22 calendar. And I know that the last couple of days we've experienced some extreme weather conditions that have prohibited our ability to physically have students in the building, but still provided the opportunity for virtual learning. And I'm wondering, Dr. Ahart, philosophically, as we move forward in subsequent fiscal years, school years, what the position on the use of the virtual framework and virtual platform will be. I think it provides an opportunity for us to continue to engage our students, especially in years, I know in the past where we've had, you know, multiple snow days, et cetera, where we've had to actually end up extending the school year beyond what we had originally anticipated. Is the thinking moving forward that now that we have created the virtual opportunity, will we continue the one-to-one environment for students and be able to maximize that virtual framework and mitigate needing to add days on at the end of the year?
Good question, Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Right now, there's actually, so 2 years ago, there was I believe it was 2 years ago, not this past year, but yeah, 2 years ago, there was some really impactful weather that hit the eastern part of the state in particular, and there were school districts, a lot of school districts that missed weeks, literally weeks of school in total. And there was a bill in front of the legislature at that time to allow them to use virtual days in lieu of makeup days, and that was rejected by the legislature. Now, the Senate File 2310 gave us that vehicle this year, and there's already a bill in the legislature that would limit our ability this year for, I think it's no more than 10 consecutive days. So I think the future opportunity is largely based on where the legislature goes. Because right now, unless something new is introduced, next year we will not have the ability to use virtual days in lieu of a what we would usually call a snow day. So we're monitoring that closely. We would like to have that ability, but at this point in time, it doesn't look like that's in the offing in the near future.
Yeah, it might be worthy of consideration potentially as we think about our legislative agenda for subsequent years to really think much more prospectively about utilizing our learning, especially during COVID, as a way to really think about advancing virtual opportunities as sort of a long game strategy.
Well said.
Yeah, just real quick, because this has been on my mind too, is I don't know, I understand that there's state action that has to happen. I worry about the relying on these virtual days to make up for significant portions of instruction because of the disproportionate impact it has on special education students. And we've already acknowledged that there's certain students that need that in-person environment and cannot have an equal educational experience in a virtual setting. And so I think we got to be thoughtful. If we have the ability to do it, we have to be very thoughtful about how often we would do that, because I think it takes us down the road of two different educational systems.
Yeah, I definitely understand that point. Yeah, if we had front time, to actually be planful about how we would execute it, that would put us in a better place. So we'll see where the legislature takes us.
Ms. Sawyer, I see your hand up. Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay. I just realized, and I hope it's appropriate to go back to just draw the public's attention to something on the consent agenda. If you'll notice, there is an item on the consent agenda for our black male algebra report. And typically you should notice us talking about that during our board sessions. We actually have had a number of work sessions to actually dig in, talk about that report. And so the reason it's on consent tonight is because we've done our work and really evaluated that that progress monitoring report. I would also say that I know that I was emailing with Erin Jenkins around one of our work sessions, which is on February 9th. That did get recorded. It's just a matter of that getting up into YouTube, and then eventually it will be available on board docs. Unfortunately, the one on the 26th was not recorded, but I just want the public to be aware we have talked about that report, and we're just not putting it on consent just to put it on consent. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer. I would like to add on to what Ms. Sawyer said under items of privilege and thank you for that reminder, because I was supposed to say something before we started with that vote, but just to also let the community know, we had made Dr. Ahart did make some changes to that report as well. So that report does reflect those changes that we had talked through as well. And so you can check out the recording. It is out there for you to view, but we have extensively talked about that and used that as practice, and we'll continue to do that as well. So that is the reason why, adding to what Ms. Sawyer said, of that being on consent for today. Dr. Ahart, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to just share with the community that we were ready to come back 5 days a week yesterday, but past practice, at least since I've been superintendent, is if we have a wind chill warning in effect enough into the day that we can't transport students while those extreme conditions exist, and a 2-hour late start does not get us into that safe zone that we cancel school. So this year, with the virtual ability, we were able to at least capture the day for the vast majority of our students and avoid putting students into harm's way. I know that the cancellation of school is a very personal decision for it impacts everybody in a very personal way, and these decisions are not made lightly. But if you can imagine that if you are in real danger, physical danger after 10 minutes of exposure, and you imagine the number of students that walk to school every day and the number of students that have to wait outside either for a bus or another ride, and the number of our families that rely on automobile transportation that have the potential of having some vehicle failure and being stranded, you can understand that safety is in those conditions requires us to really stay put and stay inside where it's safe and warm. So it's not a decision that I relish making, and I'm hopeful that tomorrow's forecast puts us into the teens, which is fantastic. So we can get back to more business as usual. But the decision is not made lightly, and we try to make it in as timely a fashion as we can, with having a degree of confidence that the forecast is going to hold through when the decision takes place. And another note is that we are in the midst of negotiations with our labor unions at present. We had very good opening sessions last week with both our DMEA, both divisions of the DMEA group, and with AFSCME. And I just want to thank the leadership of both of those groups for coming to the table with genuine, well-intended proposals and engaging with us on what is maybe historic budget challenges. We're going to keep the conversations positive and continue to look out for every single one of our almost 5,000 staff. With that, I'm just going to remind everyone to make sure if you're traveling, even if it's a short distance, make sure you're equipped in your vehicle with clothing and some food. So in the event of the unforeseen, that you're not in harm's way. That's all I have, Ms. Bradley.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ahart. Well, to my board colleagues, this doesn't happen very often, but the meeting is adjourned and we will get ready for our work session in just about 2 minutes, if that works for everyone. All right, we will go ahead and get started with our work session. Dr. Ahart, if you all are ready, I will turn it over to you and Ms. Aurora.
All right, thank you very much. And Shashank is with us tonight. You all know the kind of the overall budget circumstance that we're in, and as we have always tried to do, is try to project out 3 years. And so, while we have a plan, a 3-year plan, those are built with a whole host of pretty significant unknowns. And what we had proposed for this 3-year plan, starting with this year, was a $20 million. Actually, we started with a $14 million projected reduction, and then when COVID hit and we had an unanticipated drop in enrollment, we modified that to 20 million. There's been a whole group of folks. Mr. Aurora has put together a committee as early as last fall, working on different angles that we could pursue and attempting to get the spending down so that we can reach our unspent spending authority goal. And we've kind of hit it from just about every angle. And the last couple of years, we've had some tough decisions to make to discontinue some valued programs that weren't as directly impactful of the district priorities, in an effort to make sure that we're not negatively impacting our student experience in these just really historic underfunding, at least in the state of Iowa, of public education. So we'll go through some information to kind of update you on what we do know, what we still don't know, and we do have a property tax issue that we want to talk about. It's the right kind of property tax issue, if there's a good kind of property tax issue, and potentially making a modification to this year's target. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Shashank, and we can get moving through the presentation. And board members, I think, I'll follow your pleasure, Ms. Bradley, but if questions come up as we move through, please just chime in, and we'll be happy to answer as we move through.
Dr. Ahart, I think that would be fine if you're hearing something, because sometimes if you're like me, you want to hold on to that question to the end, then you forget it. So if something does pop in your mind as a question, feel free to ask during the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart, and good evening, everyone. I hope you can see my presentation. I have sent it to all of you yesterday evening. Last year, when I was working on the budget, I thought this was year one. Year two should be a lot easier year, but year two has turned out to be more difficult than 1 year because of COVID and some of the curveballs that have been thrown our way. So this is a work session, and I would want input from all of you, because there are things which are still moving part. We still have not really landed as to what we need to do. So some of the things that I plan to cover over here are what are the risks and unknowns, which some of you, I think all of you have seen some of them, but probably not all of them. General assumptions and forecast, property taxes, as Dr. Ahart mentioned, the financial measures and objectives, and the options to reduce costs. So enrollment has been an extremely big challenge this year, as you know. COVID has caused a lot of parents to redshirt, and we have had almost 1,000 kids less who have enrolled this year. Then some curveballs was thrown under the dome. One is the voluntary diversity plan, which we have had for a long period of time, along with 5 other districts, and that is gone. And that could have an impact on the open enrollment. And the vouchers plan, which is under discussion, but I don't think this is going to be impacting us in FY22, probably in FY23. The revenue estimating conference, as all of you know, has been very optimistic. We started the year pre-COVID in a very positive way. We have ended the year in a decent way. We are still in a surplus year. So it's in a fairly good condition. Yeah. As you know, regarding the state supplemental aid, both the chambers have approved 2.4%. The Senate started with 2.2. The House was at 2.5, but finally they agreed at 2.4. We're still awaiting the governor's signature. Since she had proposed 2.5, I would think she would accept 2.4, but the budget that you are seeing, since this happened on Friday, still has a 1% assumption over here as far as SSA goes. So just wanted to give you a heads up. There's some more legislative actions under discussion, which are still moving parts. Compliance, which was a huge unknown the last time I had discussion. Fortunately, the plan which the district has submitted was accepted. And the estimate that we think the additional hours needed to come under compliance would be somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million. The good thing,
Mr. Aurora, if I can just pipe in here, I know that looks like a very wide span, a big target. Largely, that's dependent on how many of our high school students partake in the optional 90-minute after-school session and how much transportation that will require. So that's a pretty wide target, but we'll be able to hone in on a tighter number in the next couple of weeks. Sorry, go ahead, Mr.
No, that's fine, Dr. Ahart. The only thing I would add is the good thing is this cost would not be coming out of general fund and would be coming out from ESSER. So it won't hurt our general fund. Yeah. The ESSER 2, as you know, was approved a couple of months back. The change, as I was anticipating and I had shared, is gone from giving the cash upfront to a reimbursement basis, which is typically the norm for any federal funds. The period for which the expenses would be covered under ESSER 2 is starting from March 13th of 2020 to September 30th of 2023. So fairly long period of time. The good thing is it also covers capital projects. And what do I mean by this? Like what we are investing in our HVAC systems for improving the ventilation, that would be covered as part of that. Those needs would not have arisen of upgrading our ventilation system if COVID had not hit us the way it did. So that will be covered under ESSER 2. Yeah.
Mr. Aurora?
Yes, please.
What's the estimated amount of money, I guess, that we are anticipating on the ESSER 2?
I do have it in the next slide, but since you have asked.
Oh, okay.
yeah. But since you have asked, it is $41 million that we expect under ESSER 2, and okay. ESSER 1 was $8.8 million. For round numbers, you can say $9 million approximately.
Okay, so it's about $50 million between the two then.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Staff compensation, as you know, is the single largest cost, not just for our district, but any other district. Almost 82% of our cost, and the negotiations are in progress. As Dr. Ahart said, we started it last week. We have had 2 rounds of meeting with DMEA and 1 round with AFSCME, and the second round with AFSCME will be on Thursday. So this is a huge moving part that is still unknown there. Talking a little bit further about certified enrollment, as I had mentioned that we are down 1,000 students. And out of this 1,000, almost 500 are pre-K and kindergarten. The challenge which we are facing is, the reason why I have categorized it into 2 different levels. One is the pre-K and kindergarten, and the other is from grade 1 to 12. The assumptions for how many students will come back, I think would vary based on these 2 groups, because a lot of children or students who are there in pre-K and kindergarten are the ones who could probably come back next year. And the assumption would probably be close to 65 to 75% would come back. And we have formed a small group, and we are working with them to really analyze and understand what is it, including surveying and talking to parents to find out what is the potential number that we could get back. So this is a huge moving part. Grades 1 through 12 would be a different thing. We have lost kids across all board except high schools, where we actually had almost flat to a little bit of a gain. But otherwise, in elementary schools, we have lost over 600 students, and middle schools, we have lost almost 240 students over there. So we have had losses all across. Difficult to estimate how many of them will come back. So huge unknown over here. We have discussed both, and this is not unique to DMPS. This is happening, as we know, across our state and across the country. I think this year across the state, we have lost almost 6,000 to 7,000 students. And this is the big white elephant sitting in every budget as to how many students will come back. The other big unknown is the voluntary diversity plan. Yeah. So as we know that this no longer exists, the LSA has estimated the impact of this could be $1.4 million to our district. We have historically denied a few students. Under this plan, if you're unable to deny, it could potentially be a loss of a few hundred students over here. So again, a huge moving part and very difficult to assess at this point in time. The good thing is the timeline which has been laid out by the state is March 1st. So the parents who do want to take advantage of this plan, they have till March 1st to open and roll out. So we would have better numbers as to what they could be sometime in the week of March 8th as we have tabulated the numbers. The voucher program, I don't think so it's going to impact us in 22. I think the target date by when they are supposed to come back with the recommendations is sometime in early 22. So it would impact us sometime in 23. So huge unknown on enrollment. And as we all know, that the two big drivers of revenue for any school district is enrollment and SSA. I'm going to pause. Looks like Gary Sir has a question.
Yes, thank you, Shashank. With the diversity plan, you had mentioned that March 1st being the date, the deadline for the open enrollment applications. Do we know, I mean, obviously we don't know, will that piece of legislation, would that date change? So could that be different? I'm not sure if you even have that answer, if that's just kind of still a wait and game for whatever happens during this session.
Personally, I have not seen a date other than March 1st. And again, the big wild card over here is, I don't know how many parents are really clued to it. So maybe the impact in year one may not be as significant as year 2 and 3. So again, a huge wild card, which we don't know how it could negatively impact the district. Any other questions before I go to the next slide? Okay, I'll keep rolling. So general fund forecast assumptions, as I said, we have assumed right now 1% because we got the 2.4 only we got to know on Friday, late Friday afternoon. The enrollment decrease, we are dialing in 1,000 student reduction approximately, because that is a number that we know. We still don't know how many of the 1,000 kids will come back, as I was mentioning. We do have the budget guarantee, and I would get into details on the budget guarantee also later on to explain how it's going to impact. But that is a good provision that we have. And as Dr. Ehart has mentioned, the expenditure reduction, which we were first planning for $14 million for FY22 because of the lower enrollment, we increased it to $20 million. But at this point in time, the total reductions that we have is $15 million. And I've mentioned to all of you before that the low-hanging fruit which the district had is gone. We'll have to make tougher and tougher decisions if we want to continue on the path to improve our spending authority. The salary and benefit increase, we are targeting at this point in time at 2% and other expenditures at 1%. The expenditure projections are a little difficult at this point in time because there are a lot of unbudgeted or unexpected expenses which are coming through. And this is where I was mentioning that the ESSER 1 is approximately $8.8 million and ESSER 2 is $41 million. We have had a loss of revenue due to COVID in both enterprise funds, which are the food and nutrition, as well as the Metro Kids, the childcare program. The way the ESSER funds have been, the guidance has been shared with us is the money cannot be used to fill back lost revenue, whether it is in these two enterprise funds or activity funds and other things. The other misnomer floating around is that since we have this money, it can be used for anything. That is not the case. It has to be used for something which is related to COVID, be it operating expenses or be it capital expenses, as I had highlighted before. But it has to be COVID related. Moving to the next slide, which is budget guarantee. This is where the rules dictate that any district where the total amount that the district would receive under a regular program cost is lower than the previous year, we would get a top up of at least 1% over prior year. In our case, with the 2.4% SSA, that budget guarantee comes to $4 million, which equates to an increase in property tax of 0.46717. And I will get into more detailed discussions on the property tax thing because the two huge moving parts for us today are basically the impact of enrollment and the property taxes.
Shashank, real quick.
Sure.
From my memory, I don't think the board has voted to increase property taxes in my time on the board. Do you happen to know, or could you find out when the last time was we voted to increase property taxes? We got an email recently from someone who I think it said like, when property values increase, you should decrease our taxes so our taxes don't change. But like, I don't think we've been changing people's taxes for a good number of years. Is that correct?
That is correct. To the best of my knowledge, for at least 3 to 4 years, we have tried to keep the property tax rates flat. We have not increased them at all. That is accurate.
Okay. I just remember when we went out to the community like last fall was it last fall? I think it was the fall before with the odd year election. Oh my gosh, this whole last year has just felt like 3 months and also 16 years. We had mentioned that we weren't having any plans at that time to increase funding. So is this a levy that just the board would vote on? Does this require, is this actually us requiring people's taxes, or does it just equal to that? And is that a percentage? Is that cents? I'm not quite understanding what that number is.
So if you can wait for a few more minutes, I'm sorry,
I'm getting way ahead of you.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Because that's a valid question, because any resident of Des Moines community would be looking into the slide and thinking that my property tax rates are going to be increasing. Yeah. But I do have something which I want to share a few further slides down as to what do I expect for property tax rates for Des Moines.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The other point is the on-time funding. So with that 1,000 students who are not signing, who have not enrolled at this point in time, if they were to come back, we could get that on-time funding, but that does not give us cash, that gives us spending authority. The good thing is we are sitting on a good cash balance, so it is not hugely worrying for me. What is more critical for us is the spending authority. So this is the projections for the next few years. I know it's kind of small, but if we were to focus basically on the solvency ratio and the unspent spending authority ratio, that the box which is over here is both the metrics are going in the right direction. And as we had mentioned, that the solvency ratio seems to be going a little steeper than the unspent spending authority as we try to improve the unspent authorized budget. And that'll be further clear. Yes.
Could you put that in presentation mode? It's just really difficult to read.
Is that better?
A little bit, yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And the only reason why I'm not in presentation mode is because then I can't see any one of you if I put it on that mode. Okay. So if you see over here, our unspent authority has been trending in the right direction over here. And the solvency ratio also is going in the right direction. And we have already achieved the metric that the board had laid out for solvency ratio, and unspent spending authority is still some distance away. Our assumptions over here have been fairly consistent with what we have done in the past. So there's no change over there.
Shashank,
This is
could you remind me what was the percent of solvency we were going for?
Our target was 15%. So we had hit 15% in 19, and last fiscal year that we ended, we are at 20.1%. Sorry, 20.9%, almost 21%.
And that's at least 15 or 15 at maximum?
At least, yeah. So
Okay.
Our target was 15, I would say, yeah. The challenge is, as we try to improve the unspent spending authority, solvency ratio really goes up. So that has become the huge challenge, and why, if you see, the solvency ratio keeps increasing year after year. Now, the next slide that I'm sharing is where I think some of the questions will get answered. So what I've tried to do is, this is a little different slide than what you have seen in the past. Basically, column 2 shows what is the authority of the board, what is the maximum that we can do, where is DMPS on, and the FY21 rate, which was 18.61. So even though, because of budget guarantee, the rates are going up by 0.47 over there, what has happened is that we cannot charge the cash reserve levy in case the solvency ratio exceeds 20%. And as you saw in the previous slide, that we are at 20.9 or say 21%. So that cash reserve levy, which was 2.47, has gone. That no longer exists, which is dropping the rate over here. So even though 2.47 has gone, the budget guarantee that we have increases it by 0.47. And if you may recollect, we had passed through voter approval the increase in PEPL rate, which was 71 cents. So if you see over here, the rate from 21 to 22 is going up from 0.63 to 1.34. So with this increase, as well as the budget guarantee increase, we are still at a lower rate than where we were in FY21. Now, the other change that we have done is the management fund. The management fund last year was at 3.24, and I have reduced it to 2.36. And we can decide whether we want to keep it same as 3.24 or bring it down to 2.36. But the next slide that I will share would highlight the reason why I am recommending 2.36.
And Shashank, can you just remind me so my brain's thinking about it the right way? So that's like $18.61, is it per $10,000 of value on property?
Per $1,000.
per $1,000.
per thousand. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is per thousand, 18.661 per thousand. And that will
So
become
it-
60, sorry?
Okay, so in effect, then if we would follow this model that you've shown us, it would decrease to 16.12 per $1,000 of value.
That is correct.
Okay.
And that is where I was saying that I do have a later slide to share that we are in effect not going to increase property taxes, even though we are increasing the PEPL rate and even though the budget guarantee is kicking in.
Okay, thank you.
Now the challenge is,
Hang
and
on,
where,
one more question, Shashank. before you
sorry,
move.
go on. No, sorry, go
So
on.
just so I'm clear on this, you said that, am I hearing properly that because the solvency ratio is at a high enough level, then we can just, I lost my train of thought there. There was a certain amount in there if we were under the 20%, but since we're over, that no longer factors. Is that what you're saying?
That is
Yeah.
correct. So last year it was 2.47 as part of 18.61. That 2.47 has now gone. It no longer exists. So that is one of the biggest drivers why the property tax rate is dropping.
And what is that mechanism? Like why?
Because the guidelines are that if the solvency ratio increases over 20%, a district cannot charge cash reserve levy.
Okay.
Cash reserve levy helps you to build the cash. So if your solvency ratio is that high, you can't charge that anymore.
Okay, so other districts that don't have that solvency, they would have to raise the tax to backfill.
That is correct. So a lot
Gotcha.
of districts, I think they're almost 135 to 145 districts, somewhere in that range, who would also have the budget guarantee kick in at 2.4. Quite a few of them will have to increase property tax rates. But because our situation is a little different, it's not going to increase for us.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
help? Yep, you're welcome. Now, my challenge over here is this may sound good, look good that we're reducing property taxes, but if tomorrow, if we have to increase the property tax rates, all of us are going to be struggling and we'll have to convince the community as to why do we need to increase the property tax rates. So my provocation, challenge, reasoning, I mean, the area where I need input is what is it that we really want to do over here? And I don't think that we can really keep it at 18.61 because of cash reserve levy going away. But how much increase can we do in the management fund? And I'm going to go to the next slide, and then I'll come back on this slide to explain why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting for management fund rate. So if you can see over here, I'm going to put it again in the presentation mode because little small numbers. So FY20, we ended the year with $5.4 million. And FY21, because we had increased the rate, the total balance that builds up in FY21 by the end of the year is almost $28 million. The revenue that we had collected last year because of the increased management fund rate was $28 million versus $14 million in FY20. We had built up to pay for the early retirement offering, which is going to impact us in FY22. So the entire amount of the early retirement offering would come out in FY22 budget. And I'll jump to the next slide and come back over here. So sorry for doing this, but that is going to help all of us to understand and discuss better. So when we had this plan, 103 employees have elected to take early retirement incentive. 51 are IPERS covered employees and 52 are DMTRS covered employees. The total cost of that to the district is approximately $9 million. When we budgeted in this management fund, last year we were budgeting for $10 million as an anticipated expense. We are very close to that. The only thing that has happened is we budgeted in 21, but that expense is coming out in 22. We are continuing to budget $10 million as an expense in the years 23, 24, 25 towards early retirement offering. But if you see, even though I have reduced the management fund rate from the 3.24 to the current rate of 2.36, as you would see in the slide, our balance still is increasing from $28 million to $31 million to $34 million, because that 2.7 rate equates to approximately $20 million. And this dials in the $10 million towards early retirement offering. So this is the challenge that we are sitting in at this point in time. And I'll go back to the slide.
So I guess what would our options, I think I'm just forgetting because you've given us a lot of information. What are the options for holding the property rate a little more steady?
There's really only one option, and that's the management
correct
fund, and defending raising it up to where we would need to keep it level would be really difficult to justify.
So basically, if we double the rate from 2.36, that is when we can come close to keeping the rate of FY21 flat. And to Dr. Ahad's thing, it'll be very difficult for us to defend it.
So, but besides early retirement incentives, what else can the management fund be used for?
Management fund is fairly restrictive in the sense we can use it to pay for workman's comp. We can use it to pay for insurance costs, not health insurance, but property and casualty insurance. Those are some of the big drivers. And the early indicators that we have got from our insurance broker is that next year, the PNC rate is going to go up. And we have tried to dial, because we don't have the numbers, at least some increase we have tried to dial in over there. And workman's comp, we are trying to keep it flat. Now, I don't know, because of COVID, if some cases may go up, we may have more incidents. It's difficult to guess, because I think we are following to our best of ability, the CDC guidelines. So hopefully there should not be very many cases, but that's another unknown.
So when you talk about the property and all that sort of stuff, and you say an increase, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
So the total bill for property and casualty for our buildings, and don't hold me to it, but it should be around $2.5 million in that ballpark.
Okay, yeah, so it is fairly hard to justify sitting on $40 million when those are the only things that can be spent on.
And these are the two big challenges that I have this year. One is the enrollment. The second is property taxes.
Is there a way that we're thinking about this that could put us somewhere in the middle? I mean, where we'd still reduce property taxes, but we wouldn't come down so low that when, we'd be putting a future board in a difficult position of trying to convince the community. You know what I'm thinking? Is there some sort of compromise on this, or is there not really a compromise to be had?
And unfortunately, there are only two levers which the board or the district can really pull to maintain property tax rates. One is cash reserve levy, and the other is management fund rate. And cash reserve, we can't charge anymore because of the solvency ratio that we have reached. And management fund rate, we can increase, but it's going to become extremely difficult to justify that balance. So, and that is the reason why I really wanted to discuss, because we may be able to please the community today, but tomorrow the board is going to really have an uphill battle trying to convince an increase if we need to go in that direction.
So if the budget guarantee was not a factor this year, right? Say we did not lose those kids, how would this conversation be different?
The only difference it would have been that it would have been further lower by that 0.47. Yeah. Because that 0.47 is kicking in right now. Yeah.
I don't see another way of looking at the situation, Shashank. I mean, I think that you know, the district and the board have a solid month and a half here to continue doing this work, and perhaps there's another way of thinking about it that we'll come to over time. But otherwise, I think you kind of present us with a pretty open and shut case. You know, I really don't want to put the community through large swings in property tax rate. I do worry about what this does for future boards, but I honestly don't know much more that we can do. You know, in your earlier slides, you projected the management or the cash reserves dipping below, back down below where they presently are in about 3 or 4 years. So theoretically, the cash reserve levy would be available to a future board. So that's a lever to pull, but it's not a lever that we can pull immediately. And by the time we would pull that lever, we would probably be in the position of increasing property taxes overall.
Yeah, I would agree with Rob. You know, in my years on this board, I think we have really attempted to balance and leverage all of our levies and every opportunity we had to balance those in a way that creates an opportunity for us to maximize them to the benefit of the taxpayer. And I think we find ourselves in a place now where we don't have a lot of opportunity. And then when you layer on top of that state supplemental aid that's not even meeting the basic requirements of our human services line items, we find ourselves in a really tough spot. And I think that, you know, that's sort of the history of budgeting in this district. And it sort of makes you feel like you're, you know, trying to, you know, get in a boxing ring with both hands tied behind your back. So, yeah, I mean, I agree that what you have proposed at least helps us to understand the sort of the competing nature of the levies relative to what latitude we have, but I just don't know that there's a whole lot of play here that we have the ability to really manipulate to our benefit any further.
And I've had initial discussions with Larry Siegel, which all of you know, and I wanted to pick his brains as well. And I will continue to have discussions with him to see if he has something that we can do to help. But his initial reaction was that we are in a bind and it may be difficult for us to keep the rates flat.
Tom, I know that you and your team have started the work of reductions. Is that something that you will be sharing with the board and what that looks like? And
Yeah,
how that,
we'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation.
okay.
Yep. So this is definitely a moving part, and we will continue to evaluate if we can get some answers to help us out. But just to give you some idea, some background, we still don't have all the official numbers of the management fund for the state for FY20, but I tried to pull some numbers for basically the period of the last 12 years, which is 2008 to 2019. And the numbers, these columns in yellow are where Des Moines district stands. So this basically shows what is the average dollar per student. So if you see, we are $300 to $400 on an average per student. And the bar graph on the right-hand side basically shows the average fund balance. And the fund balance for us is over $1 million. And that is where almost 33 districts within the state today stand. This particular slide over here basically tries to show what is the actual fund balance for the various districts. On the right-hand side, it shows. So we have districts like West Des Moines, which are sitting on almost $8.5 million in management fund. And there are 22 of the 33 districts greater than $1 million. And 22 of the 25 largest districts have a management fund of more than $1 million. And I don't know where the numbers of 2020 are. And by the time we will be presenting to the board the final budget, hopefully we should have the numbers, because this year the budget presentation was delayed by a lot of districts. The state has been unable to pull the numbers so far, because if you remember, typically we have till April 15th, but because of COVID, the state had given extensions. So a lot of districts had taken advantage of that, and it was presented a little bit later. But hopefully we should have the number yet this month. This is a snapshot which we present and share with the board. And this is where, if you saw, the objective for solvency ratio and spending authority is 15%, and our estimate for 21 for spending authority is 7.1. And in case we manage to hit $20 million, it'll be almost 10.6 in 2022. And the solvency ratio continues to be over 20%. Again, to highlight the solvency ratios, yes, we are on the higher end, but there are districts further to our right also, and we are, I won't say center, a little bit on the higher side, but still not on the extremes compared to other districts in our state. So basically, some type of comparative I've tried to provide so that everyone knows where we as a district are.
One more time, what is the basic solvency ratio? It's expenses to debt or revenue to debt, I mean?
Basically, it is the cash, unrestricted cash to revenues.
Okay.
But it's what we have like on hand at a particular moment in time, right? And that dipstick is taken like the end of June or something.
Correct, end of June, that is correct.
Yeah, so sometimes it's like, it could be really high in, I don't know, April, and then swings low in May, and then comes back up in June. Like, it's not constant, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Just trying to share some of the knowledge I'm finally remembering about solvency ratios after almost 4 years on this board.
Yeah. It really helps to balance the tough cash times that we find ourselves in, especially in the summer months when we're still waiting for the state to make their disbursements to us. So it's really sort of our cash balancing, sort of our credit card, if you will, for cash to support the ongoing operations.
Very true. Absolutely. I agree with you. So this is where...
not to pile on, but if you get too low and we have to take out a line of credit, then it actually costs the district money to borrow.
Very true. And plus, when we go out for bonding, if we have very low ratios, the rates are also higher for us if you're not sitting on good cash balances. So yes, both those points, interest cost. And by the way, talking about interest cost, since we know the interest rates are at historic lows, we used to get over 2%, and today we are getting under 10 basis points. So that is again something which is negatively impacting us because we're sitting on a fairly decent cash balance. But when you get 10 basis points, it is as good as nothing. So the next slide is where I wanted to share what is it that we are doing to reduce the costs. And I like the board when they ask me something before I'm about to share. so all of you are thinking ahead. So over here, these are the basic things, and I'm going to try to go by activity over here, item by item. So I shared about the early retirement offering. The big driver for us is it could lead to potential savings in our general fund. This is an estimate that it could be a saving of $2 million. We still haven't done the analysis to see out of those employees who've selected how many are general fund paid, how much are SPED paid, and other positions paid. And again, we don't know as we start backfilling these positions, the employees that we will hire, the teachers that we will hire would be with a similar kind of experience or with lower amount of experience, leading to the actual savings and cost. So we have used the historic way that we have calculated it and we have put it, but it's, and this is the first year that we'll actually be tracking going forward to see that if we have budgeted for $2 million, where is it that the actual savings are going to come from and how much they are. So we will be tracking it, and as we go along doing the thing. Discontinuation of activities. These activities that we have over here is basically we have closed a program on IB. So there is a part FTE cost, which is sitting in FTE, and part is program cost, which is sitting over here in activities. We have held a conference, Climate Summit Conference, which used to be subsidized to some extent from the general fund. Since we are not holding that conference because of COVID, it's a conference where we have more than 1,000 participants. Obviously, it is not safe to hold it under this current situation, so we are delaying it. That is going to help us. And then some of the stipends which are under discussion, that is going to add to that reduction of activities. We are discussing with both unions or all the unions as far as health benefits and payroll goes. I have dialed in $4 million over here. Staffing in all areas and departments. The biggest contributor is the teachers. As the enrollment have come down, we have done the allocation work, and we have seen that there would be certain positions, whether it is elementary or middle high schools, because of the lower enrollment, that will drop down. There's some positions on the central campus which will not exist, some in operations, some in HR, so all across the board, this is where we have reductions coming out in staffing in different areas. This is something which we have continued to do, but if you see the costs which we are moving from general fund to save in PEPL, they're becoming smaller and smaller, and I doubt if this will even be an item next year. Even this $500,000 at this point in time seems to be a little bit of a stretch. And as I had said, that since in the numbers that we have dialed only 1% right now as the SSA increase, even though more likely than not it's going to be 2.4. So if we do get 2.4, that'll add to $3.2 million. So with all these items, we will have around $15.3 million, or as I was saying, $15 million in reduction. Having said that, we still haven't finished our negotiations, so I don't know whether the health benefits and payroll cost will actually be $4 million or not. In the discontinuation of activity, we have almost $800,000 to $900,000 for stipends. I don't know what we're going to agree to, where we'll finally decide and land on. So there are some moving parts as we speak right now. And that $5 million is going to be very, very challenging for us to really achieve at this point in time, unless we take some serious action.
Can you talk a little bit about those stipends? What are you talking about? Stipends for what?
There are stipends related to instructional coaches, stipend related to game coaches, certain, I mean, they're all over the board, all kinds of different stipends over here. Yeah. So we as a district on an annual basis pay close to $6 million in stipends. And there are some positions which get 6, 7, 8 stipends. So we are basically giving stipends as a very hard look to see, is there an opportunity for us to reduce costs over here or not?
So the other 4.5 million, what are the most likely places where that might come from?
You mean okay.
To get up to 20, I mean to say.
Yeah, so that's we're still looking for additional positions to cut, but we're really kind of there's not a whole lot left there. So one thing that Shashank and I actually discussed yesterday, I guess it was, is the possibility of outside of FTEs doing an across the board cut. But if you exclude personnel from an across the board, that percentage of cut gets pretty big pretty fast to cover that big of a chunk of dollars. So I think there's a couple of considerations here, at least in my mind, and Shashank can weigh in here too, is, possibly modifying our target for end of year unspent spending authority to something a little bit lower than what we had targeted. And there is a possibility of some spending authority toward that existing $4.7 million gap coming in some form of either additional dollars from the legislature relative to COVID. That's not going to be a huge chunk for us, but could be something. And then utilizing our ESSER funds in such a way that we can squeeze out some legitimate expenses that are COVID related, but that we didn't have enough in ESSER 1 to take care of, that could take care of a chunk of that. So I think it's some combination of those, and then also seeing, where do the current unknowns, which SSA frankly is still a bit of an unknown as our negotiations, and as Shashank said, the enrollment guess is a really, that's always a difficult one. It's particularly challenging this year, and we're actively investigating that to get us close to what we think is a reasonable number. But I may be recommending, I'm not ready to do that right now, but maybe recommending adjusting our unspent spending authority target so that we don't have to cut quite as deeply. And Shashank, I don't know if you want to put your 2 cents worth in.
No, I think I would agree with it, because it also adds a little bit of a challenge with the solvency ratio, and maybe we can take a slower approach. But the next slide, which I am going to share, will help us in future years, depending on how aggressive we want to be. So if you want, I can move to the next slide, because what I'm suggesting and proposing over here is we have to look and have a longer term strategy. We have looked at it in a very operational way, and looked at the year that we are addressing. I'm thinking of looking forward ahead for the next 2 or 3 years, because some of these things will take us time to implement. So the 3 things that I am proposing at this point in time, and I'm open to suggestions, is the demographic study, evaluating and implementing the recommendations that we have received in that. What does it entail? How many buildings do we want to have? Do we want to consolidate? What is the path forward? difficult, very difficult decision. I fully understand that. But I think if we want to continue on this path, this is something which we may have to address. The athletics committee proposal will be coming in. I don't know what exactly it will be. I think the way I understand it, it's going to be shared with the board sometime in February, March kind of timeline. What Tom and I, when we had met with them, what we had suggested to them was if it is going to be coming in April, March, April kind of timeline, we may not be able to implement unless there is a low hanging fruit or some safety related thing in 22. It's probably going to impact us 23 and beyond. We don't know what exactly that would be. And the third was student ROI, basically continuing to evaluate all the academic programs to see where do we get the highest return for the student for the amount that we are investing, and removing the programs which provide the least value to the students. So this is what I'm suggesting, that if it is acceptable to all of us, we start looking into this from a longer term perspective, which can have an impact 23, 24, 25 kind of timeline.
Do
Just
you
a
have the
couple questions.
results? Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to ask a couple questions on your recommendations. With the demographic study, who conducts that? How does that process move through? How do we move through that process? And then the student ROI, I mean, is that something that would be based on programs, like teams and programs that would evaluate that, but also making sure we're putting dollars within that, like what's the cost per student? And all those sorts of things that we'd be able to look at that data kind of more granular.
Yes, as we start looking into that, absolutely. Yeah. So we would look, as far as demographic study goes, we would engage a third-party consultant who would look as to what is happening to the number of students per building, whether we have to redraw lines, whether we have to consolidate building. The challenge which comes is, say, for example, we continue to keep a building open so that there is less backlash for us. It is not just a general fund dollar issue. It is also the investment of our save and pepper dollars which are going in. We will have to continue to maintain the buildings at that same level. And you invest millions of dollars in those buildings. And if you decide to sell it 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we will never be able to recover those dollars. And that is what I find really challenging as far as investing those saved dollars over there goes. And obviously, if we do consolidate, it impacts across the district, across all the functions as far as how many employees would either be going to a different building or will not have a position anymore. And this is not an easy exercise. It's a time-consuming exercise. We'll have to involve the community. We'll have to do a lot of work on this. It's real heavy lifting, as all of us know. And that's why I want to know whether we have an appetite to go in this direction or not. And for sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. One thing that I just want to raise up is I remember from when I was running for school board, 4 years ago, there was still a lot of animosity among the east side because they had lost 3 elementary schools, and then they were above capacity and there was the possibility to build a new elementary school, which then that didn't work out. That I would just recommend, if we are moving forward with potentially looking for that we may want to start laying the groundwork for that, including starting to think about an equity process for what that would look like, because I think that the east side was very heavily influenced on that, and from talking with folks, it wasn't necessarily that those were the schools with the lowest enrollment, but I think that boards in the past were not operating under the same view or lens, I guess, that this board in this district does its work under now, I guess. So if we're starting to think that could happen in the next 5 to 10 years, I think it would be potentially, and sometimes maybe I lean more towards trying to provide too much information, but I just think that's something maybe we want to think about preparing the community for, that it might be part of the next, 5 or 10 year or fewer budgeting plan. Because I think losing a school is very difficult on neighborhoods.
And that's why I raise it over here. I've never been involved in the process, but everything that I've read and heard, it's not an easy thing to accomplish. And Tom, please weigh in over here.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, I think you're right, Stella Gardell, that I hear that frequently as well. And I don't believe there's anybody on the board that was involved in making those decisions at that time. But whenever you close a school, especially in our district, because as a rule, our buildings have been around for a very long time, serving the same neighborhood for a very long time, and there's lots of community investment in those schools, and they add a lot to their neighborhoods, and which is a thing to celebrate. But there gets to be an efficiency issue, especially when the state is approaching school funding in the manner that they are, not even covering inflationary costs. So it's going to be a long-term process. It's not something that we could start right now and then have big decisions made next fall, but it's going to have to be something that if we choose to go down that road, we're going to have to commit to it and have heavy engagement with the community. And even then we'll be faced with some very challenging decisions. Another thing too, with our buildings, and there's something in a document that I shared with the board earlier, just a couple of small notes, but we operate our buildings actually very efficiently. And so the savings that we get from closing a building are, I think, sometimes more limited than what folks may imagine from the outside. If we're if we're still serving the same number of students, we're not saving instructional staff dollars. There's some a principal, let's say if you close an elementary school, you would save the cost of a principal and a office manager and a nurse perhaps, which is something, but not huge. And we spend our spend for what it costs per square foot in our district is very, very low compared to a national average when we're talking about custodial costs and especially energy costs. So, and then you also have the challenge of what can you do with that site, with that building, in a way that isn't going to actually become problematic for the neighborhood. So it's a big undertaking. I think it's an appropriate undertaking, and one that we need to do very thoughtfully with full engagement with the community. And doing it well will make the district in the long term healthier, but the decisions won't be easy, and it's certainly not a panacea for solving what I consider a structural issue if the state's going to continue to hover around, a 2% or less supplemental state aid on a year-over-year basis.
And just to add about the supplemental aid, this was a perfect year for the state to do something good. Historically, the amount of dollars which are funded towards K through 12 are $95 million. At 2.4%, that is only $55 million. So if they could easily have given somewhere between 3.5% to 4% and still be within the $95 limit, but they did not choose to do that.
Tom, could I just ask that you send us an update, and it doesn't have to be part of the conversation tonight, but in terms of our legislative priorities, because I know we had some out there around like at-risk funding, and I know that factors into this conversation. So I just didn't know if there was any progress. happening. If
Yeah.
you would just send us an update on that, maybe on Friday or whatever.
You bet. You bet. I sure will.
Thank you.
I just had a real quick question. This might be getting into the weeds a little bit. I don't recall when we last did a demographic study. But I also think that I recall that there was a little trepidation around the consultant, maybe that we used for the last study. And I'm just wondering sort of what the universe looks like for people who actually do this work, and the opportunity that might exist for us to bring somebody in that can really sort of help us level set around this really important piece of information that is really intended to not only help us to do some budget forecasting and prospecting, but also to really help us around facilities development and ways that we use that information to really help inform building level issues, as well as plan for population shifts and changes, especially at the elementary level. That's where I think we see the biggest effect of that demographic information.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's a small universe, is what I can tell you. There, we engaged with some folks in Omaha who do not formally engaged, but through the council, I learned of some folks in Omaha who've done work for OPS, and they really were not interested in doing work outside of OPS, which speaks to the nature of the difficulty of doing a meaningful, accurate, a reasonably accurate demographic study in a mature city. With all of the, because there's plenty of folks who will go into a fast growing new suburban community like Waukee or Ankeny, and who have a formula that they, or an algorithm that they apply that's extremely accurate, but it doesn't apply in a context like Des Moines. So yeah, it's a small universe. I think we need to find the ones who can be most effective and who will most who have a track record of doing this kind of work in a community that is somewhat resembles ours, so that we're not making an investment and then trying to do planning on data that really just isn't rooted in meaningful projections. But it's a tough nut to crack, for sure.
Does the census provide us any sort of 30,000 overview picture of at least where our population is currently, or does it kind of break that down better by age, so that we'd have at least like a snapshot in time of what it could look like?
We've used census data internally and have made projections. How we've been developing our projections over time, we've been doing internally, rather than using the Department of Education's projections, which I think are solely based on census, and theirs have been, at the district level anyway, notoriously unreliable and inaccurate. But I don't think it gets us to the level that we need to be forward looking in anticipation of what the needs will be 5-10 years down the road.
Do we have any idea what it would cost to do this kind of study?
I don't know, but somewhere around 30, 40, $50,000, I would presume, but I'm not too sure.
I would say it's north of that for what we would be asking for.
Okay.
Yeah, the price isn't so much. I don't think the issue is finding someone that that has the track record of doing quality work in this kind of context. And the other, and another piece too that complicates it, or potentially could complicate it, is changes in legislation that would potentially add another variable in terms of what expectations for enrollment would be within district.
Yeah, I was mostly just thinking, it sounds like it wouldn't hurt to run something like this, but if the cost is in the millions, then that's a different conversation, you know?
Right, right.
Shashank, will we hear from you again prior to certification? Like, will there be an opportunity for additional questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We can definitely connect if you have any questions. In fact, I would look forward to any comments on the various points that we have discussed, whether it is related to property tax rates, whether it is related to enrollment, whether it is the long-term cost reduction strategies that I've shared, or anything else as such. I'm happy to listen, hear from all of you, as well as if anyone has any questions, willing to address that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I just know in the past we've had kind of the benefit of multiple presentations to help flesh out our thinking. And I know we're getting close to 8 o'clock now, and not that I want to hurry anybody along, but we had a quick night and now we've had a long work session. So
My apologies.
no, you're good. These are great questions. I'm learning a lot.
Can I jump in and piggyback off of Kirsten's question? First of all, Dwana had to step away, so I'm your MC now. So I think that's Kirsten's question is probably timely and probably the next and last thing that we should address with our time. We have as always, one board meeting set in March, in 2 weeks from today. And that'll be the last board meeting we have before we approve the budget when we come back in April. So, we clearly have one opportunity for additional work session time if that's our desire, but we can do more than that too if we want to schedule board time outside of our regular board meetings. Dwana, Tom, and team and I have agenda planning on Friday, and Shashank is in that, so that would be a good time for us to talk about this. So what I want to do is I want to jump off of what Kirsten said and ask if there's additional information folks want. We can then think about how to accomplish that in additional work session times. And so people can jump in right now and say what they want, or they can email Dwana and or myself, and we can try and pick those conversations up on Friday when we meet.
Yeah, I'm thinking especially with a change in the taxes, I think having an opportunity for the board to wrap our brains around this and what's the 60-second elevator pitch when we have a community member, ask us in the grocery store. So maybe a 30-second pitch. So I'm not standing super close to strangers right now, but what is that quick pitch for how we would do that? Or, what's kind of the response when we get email questions or that sort of thing? I think that would be good, but I also, do we have dates for our public forum so we can start sharing those out as well?
No, we don't at this point in time. Yeah, we don't.
Okay. Rob, could I ask that maybe that gets figured out at agenda planning on Friday? Thank you.
I would like some more details into the proposed cuts that are on the table. I know that we got a high level overview of that, but I would be interested in knowing in more detail what that looks like.
We can share that with you. Absolutely. Not a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just so my board colleagues know, there was an agenda item in January of 2020 regarding a demographic study. There was an RFP done, so there is some information out in board docs regarding the last time an RFP was done.
I'll just, I don't know that nobody's jumping up to the mic, so I'll repeat my request that if you have other information you're looking for that you think would be helpful, please let Dwana and I know before Friday so that we can figure out a plan to do that. These are good things. I've taken notes on everything, and I'm sure Shashank is as well, and Tom is as well, so we can make sure that we're responsive to what board members need as we kind of move through the budget process. Are there other questions for Shashank or Tom on this this work session?
It's maybe not even a question, but I know Shashank, you and I met, I don't even know, maybe 2 weeks ago. And maybe this comes down to getting more into what the cuts are, but you know, for me, I'm always interested in how and how you guys are budgeting. And maybe this is more just a general, is this a part that buildings come in, they build a budget? Is it that teams come in, they build a budget? And so for me, I'm very cautious of wanting to be respectful, not duplicative in service. And so are there positions or opportunities where we can save if we see, like, I don't know, and I think I'd asked this, Shashank, when we were on the phone with Susie, has there ever been like a deep dive into what is an analysis of all of our expenses and how we're best using our funds? And I'm not bringing that up for this budget year, but just something I always contemplate and sit and think of as it's good to kind of go back through where you spend your money and is that the best use?
So the process that we adopted this year is we have a budget subcommittee. We have representatives from all the different departments. We started meeting every month, then I increased the cadence to every 3 weeks. I had couple of meetings with DMEA leadership. I had meetings with AFSCME, discussed with them, shared with them what we are doing, requested for inputs from all of them, had a meeting with the administrators, presented to them over there. And so try to engage a fairly broad audience for any ideas. And I've always told everyone in the district, if they have an idea, don't hesitate sending an email to me. My calendar is packed. I don't always respond within 24 or 48 hours, but you'll definitely get a response from me. But I try to respond to all the emails. Yeah. So engaged a fairly large group. The headcount reduction is largely based on an allocation study, which the HR does. And they have their own formulas as to how many students, how many teachers, and what is needed, and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, they work very closely with DMEA and others on that. Yeah. But deep dive and all those kind of things are absolutely something that we need to do, even more than what we have done in the past. And the more stones I turn, the more things I find under each stone as I'm looking into it.
I know that the process has just begun with negotiations and with DMEA and AFSCME, but do we have a timeline regarding when that negotiation process will be concluded?
Well, I think that there's still hope that we may conclude before the end of this month. That's always a bit of an open question, but we've had a very solid start, and we're not that far away from one another. So I'm not going to promise by the end of this month. Last year, things went real smoothly, and we wrapped up right before spring break. So I would anticipate a similar timeline this year.
I'm guessing that the outcome of those negotiations will greatly impact what's presented before us for the final vote. So if you can keep us apprised of that progress, that would be great.
Sure.
Any more questions or comments? All right, I think I'm going to call this one. I appreciate the presentation, Shashank and Tom. This was very informative. I think this was a very good place for us to be at right now. I definitely recognize the desire to maybe spend some time getting, I think, a bit more into the detail of the budget that we would be voting on in April and taking to the community prior to that. And I think that's, broadly speaking, kind of what I'm taking from folks' requests. And so just keep in touch with us if there's additional information you want, and we'll make sure to facilitate that. And otherwise, if nobody has anything else, I am going to close out our work sessions. Was our only item on the agenda tonight. So, thank you all. I appreciate the attention and a good meeting. And we'll see you around the bend.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Stay